So, he fasted 40 days and 40 nights. Actually, if you count from today until Easter Sunday, it's 46 days, because it includes Sundays. And when I first began to observe Lent, it was a real test of your seriousness that you did it, whatever you had decided to do or give up for Lent, you did it every day until Easter Sunday. But I must admit, as I've mellowed over the years, I have become a little more attracted to the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox practice, which is to recognize that the 6 days, the 6 Sundays of Lent are days off. And I think, I feel more and more that gives you a better appreciation of what the 40 days are about. Because we're only observing the 40 days because Christ is risen. And the Sunday is, of course, the day of the resurrection, the day which surpasses every other religious feast or kind of event. So I leave it to you to see how scrupulous you may be. I'm a little less scrupulous now than I was. So, but I think there's a sense of the meaning of Lent that is better sharpened when we understand that it takes place within that overall context of the resurrection. But in the Gospels, we hear that Jesus went into the desert and fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. 40 is a number that turns up many times in religious symbolism. Of course, the Israelites spent 40 years in the desert. Muhammad spent 40 years in a cave preparing for his mission. The Buddha spent 40 days and nights under the Bodhi tree. And in the Kabbalah, 40 years is what it takes to complete a cycle of transformation, where you move from a good intention and eventually come to a transformation of what the process is all about. So Lent has that symbolic meaning. It's about a process, a time taken to complete something, or the time that we need to prepare for the next stage of our life or of our journey. Lent is not a time for inducing pain or unnecessary discomfort. There's enough of that without having to add to it. The purpose of Lent is to really sharpen our sense of God. And I'll come back to this idea of the God sense, or our having this sense of God in a minute. The purpose of Lent is to sharpen that sense by simplification above all. By simplifying the way we live, the way we spend our time, the way we deal with emotion, the way we deal with our thoughts, just to simplify things. I was meditating a few days ago in a poor part of Mexico, where our community has been introducing meditation to the children. And it was really a most beautiful day to meet these groups of children and meditate with them and see how beautifully they go into the silence and the stillness. And when we teach meditation to children at that age, we don't say, you ought to meditate twice a day, morning and evening. What I would be more likely to say to them would be, just now that you understand how beautiful meditation is, and they do, they love it. You can meditate whenever you like. And I think at that tender age, I suppose they still are learning, they need to learn discipline, but in the spiritual life, I think they just need to be themselves, to be spontaneous, because they learn so much from their spontaneous, well, we've got children next door, we should teach them to meditate now. They learn from their own experience in the present moment. But at a certain age, when we come out of that, that phase of life, we do need discipline. And we need a period like Lent or Ramadan or the Rains Retreat, which the Buddhist monks in Thailand follow. We need specific times to resharpen our sense, our spiritual sense, and we need a discipline to renew us. So I think simplification is the first thing we do in Lent. That may be that we reduce something or cut back on something. Certainly it means that we don't waste time, we don't waste things. And it's a good time, therefore, to take stock of our lifestyle and to see how much time we spend wasting it. You know, in the media, on the internet, or reading magazines about celebrities or things like that. Ways in which are both tiring and wasteful at the same time. So just to simplify, it may mean that we cut back, we give up on something, we reduce some consumption, or we reduce some activity. You may have thought about this already, but it's something to think about now. And another aspect of Lent that really sharpens our sense of God, I think, is purification. Purity of heart, clarity of mind, being able to see things as they really are. And a quick way to do that is to be able to identify the ego. We all know we've got ego. We all know that the ego can get into pretty well anything we do, even our good works. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus warns us not to parade your good works before men, and not to draw attention to yourself if you're fasting or doing something altruistic or philanthropic. Do it in secret, he says. And the secrecy, the word secret here really means both mysterious and interior. Not that you're hiding something, but that you're not flaunting it, you're not being ostentatious about it. And you're not indulging the ego in its theatricality, the way the ego dramatizes ourselves, and it likes to draw attention and play a certain role. So to purify our intention in everything we do, in the way we do our work, in the way we live out our relationships, and we have many different levels of relationship. Or the way we simply sit on the tube or walk down the street, to be able to really detach and to let go, to be non-possessive. That's what purification of heart means, I think. And the third element of Lent that helps us to sharpen the sense of God is to prioritize things. And we're always trying to do that when we do our to-do lists every day. What's the most important thing I want to accomplish today? But actually to get to that point where we see what is the absolute priority. Jesus says, set your mind on God's kingdom, God's presence, God's action in your life before everything else. And then everything else will come to you. Everything else falls into place, of course, when you get the right priority, the absolute priority, clear. So to help us to do those three things, to simplify, to purify, to prioritize ourselves during these 40 days, it's a good idea to see it as a work of ascesis, the Greek word which means exercise or training in the same way that an athlete would train, or an exercise as we try to do to keep fit. That's what ascesis means, and ascesis is an indispensable part of any life that is truly spiritual or has some kind of spiritual purpose and aspect to it. We need this ascesis, this exercise, this training. And in a sense, then we could see Lent as a program of ascesis. Again, not meant to damage us or to unnecessarily hurt us or cause pain at all, but to sharpen, to get into a better state of fitness. And what we're training for is not a competition, of course, so we don't have to compete with anybody else, but we're training for the best way of celebrating Easter. These three mysterious and powerful, deeply symbolic, deeply transformative days, both of ritual and reading and reflection and prayer and community, that is very much at the heart of the Christian's life every year. We only have a certain amount of Easters that we're going to celebrate, in the same way we only have a certain amount of Christmases. And so the better prepared we are for those sacred mysteries of Easter, the better for our life as a whole. So we're training, in a sense, getting into a good place where we can really enter into the Paschal mystery of Jesus, and to see that Paschal mystery as being lived out in ourselves and in the cosmos. So to help us to do that in a practical way, we may want to do something for Lent. What are you doing for Lent? Sometimes it just means giving up, but I think giving up is the other thing we have to do. We have to give up something, and we should do something. And we don't have to parade this before men and dramatize it, but it's something that we probably intuitively know ourselves what would be the best form of doing it. What is the best thing to give up or to cut back on, and what would be the best thing we can do in addition. I mean, maybe to determine that you'll do your morning meditation before checking your emails or listening to the radio. You may have seen a conversation I had with Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father of Singapore, who learned to meditate later in his life, and he was very, very ascetical, very well-disciplined person. But he said he found it very difficult to do the morning meditation, because when he woke up in the morning, he was very wide awake. He had limited energy as he got older, so he wanted to use his time very well. So the first thing he always did was turn on his computer. But of course, by that time, once he'd seen what was happening in the world and what he had to do that day, it was too late to meditate. So, but later he did say that he had got the second meditation in before he died. So maybe just doing something like that, just being conscious of of the value of something that is already present in our life, like the morning and evening meditation, and if it's not fully present in your life, to determine to to make it a more faithful, more regular practice. Maybe reading something, but reading it in a way that slows you down, rather than wanting to finish the book as quickly as possible so you can get on to the next one. Or rather than reading in order to acquire information or even ideas or things to talk about, you read in order to truly nourish your mind and your heart and your feelings through a real process of attention. Rather than quantity, you concentrate on the quality of your reading. So you set aside a few minutes every day to read in that way. St. Benedict was very insistent that the monks of his monasteries would read, even if they didn't want to read. He said they had to learn. So I think to take some time to read in that way. We tend to speed read, we skim, we skip, we gut a passage, but really to value the text, therefore read something that is worth that special attention and that will respect the attention that you're giving it. And then on the other side, about giving up, it may just begin with reducing excess, either in consumption or in the things that we do, waste time in. Or we all know that we have certain addictions, habits that we think we can control, but actually are very difficult or impossible to control. To identify those and to try to work on those, to free oneself from any addictive habits would be a good way of giving up something. Let's come back again to what Jesus says about this ascetical spiritual discipline or exercise. Fasting and almsgiving are the two things he focused on. And the early Christians saw the practices of the Christian life in three ways: fasting, almsgiving, giving away what you have or part of it, and truly giving it away. Sometimes we give away, but we don't let go, or we have strings attached, conditions attached to the gift. And we're not really giving alms unless you really let go of what you're giving. So anyway, fasting, some kind of control of our consumption, food, drink, whatever, time, and also almsgiving that is truly renunciatory, truly letting go, and truly freeing you from the attachments we have to what we have. That's the problem of possessions. It's why it's difficult for us to get into the kingdom of heaven with our possessions. It's not so much the possessions that are the problem, it's our attachment, our possessiveness, our fear of losing them, our fear of letting go. So almsgiving, fasting, and then for the early Christians, prayer. And these three aspects, or these three exercises, or these three elements in daily life were seen as constituting the, as it were, the means to the end. These were particular practices which become integrated into our lives and become, in a sense, second nature. like meditation does. After a certain period of practice and learning and discipline, it just becomes part of your life. Somebody in Ireland, I heard the other day, was speaking to some doctors about meditation, and he said to them, when I first began to meditate, the most difficult thing was to do it. And now, the most difficult thing is not to do it, because I know that my day is weaker or diminished, incomplete in some way if I miss my meditation. So these are exercises which we shouldn't be too self-conscious or self-analytical or self-centered about. This is what Jesus means when he says, your left hand must not know what your right hand is doing. This is a very important insight, I think, into the kind of consciousness we need to develop in our spiritual life, kind of unconsciousness in our spiritual life. Unconscious, not in the sense that we don't know what we're doing, but unconscious in the sense that the ego consciousness is not controlling it. It's not calling the shots, it's not looking for rewards, it's not looking for a sense of self-gratification or a sense of self-importance or any of the things that we like to get out of good works. So unconscious in the sense that it releases us from the constant self-analysis. Am I happy? Am I being fulfilled? Am I getting what I should get out of this commitment I'm making? Am I being rewarded enough by the great paymaster in the sky? So that kind of self-analysis and self-evaluation can really cripple the spiritual dimension of our work, of our activity, of our prayer, of our fasting, of our almsgiving. We've simply turned it away from being a spiritual exercise into being some kind of bargain, some kind of self-fulfillment project. So Lent is a time where we can kind of flush that toxin of the ego out of our spiritual life. And just sort of restore the purity, restore the simplicity to our spiritual journey. Instead of wasting time, first of all we have to honestly recognize where we are wasting time. Instead of wasting time, we use time. We use it in a non-exploitative way. Most of us are paid for our time, paid by the hour, paid by the week, paid by the month or the year. And so we're using time, but not for a kind of remuneration. And in that sense, it's only when we use time in that way, without looking to what we get out of it, not sort of clocking in and saying, this is the amount I've given of my time, this is the reward I expect. It's when we practice time, use time in this unself-conscious way that we actually make time. We make time for something. And therefore our stress reduces. Our sense of pressure, anxiety, the feeling that we are not going to be able to do everything we wanted to do, or the fear that things are going to close in upon us and crush us. What poor Martha in the Martha and Mary story felt. So that's when time actually expands, and we find we have more time than we had before. I think for all of us living in the kind of lifestyle we live today, it's almost inevitable that our natural sense of God becomes dulled or jaded, simply because of the exposure we have to the media, of the pressures we live under, the number of things we have to do in a limited space of time. So it's very inevitable, really, that unless we take some special step, our sense of God, our knowledge of God, our experience of being connected to the kingdom is going to get worn down, like a blade that just gets dulled. And so it needs awakening. We're dulled by distractions, and we fall asleep spiritually through the addiction to distractions. And of course, we don't know that we're asleep. We think we're awake because we're suffering anxiety, because we're suffering from a feeling of impatience, because we are suffering from all of the anxiety that is produced by this constant state of distraction. We think we're awake because we're feeling these reactions, responses, but in fact, spiritually, we are sinking into a deeper and deeper torpor. St. Augustine said that everything in the world can be divided into what he called signs, or we might say symbols, and things. Symbols and things. And things are self-referential. They just point to themselves. These are things we do that have no other real significance, no meaning apart from themselves and what I get out of them. Meetings we go to, or relationships we have, or activities we do, or entertainment that we follow, that have no other purpose really except to refer to themselves. Those are really what distractions are about. And the alternative to that are symbols that point beyond themselves, that have a life within them, a spiritual life, a symbolic life. And this symbolic life, this resonance with the spiritual consciousness, it can be found in anything, the smallest things in our life, the little routines we have every day. I'm not talking about great, church services. I'm just talking about the little things, the routes we walk along every day, to the bus, to the tube, the little habits we have in our domestic life. These can be truly symbolic in that sense. They can be filled with a sense of purpose, meaning, and delight. And in that sense, they become prayer. They become prayerful. Things don't pray. They just need to be recharged when the battery runs out. Like most of our devices are things. But symbols don't need to be recharged. They just need to be re-entered because they have a life of their own. They don't run out. And to help us to do this, of course, we do need to exercise some self-awareness, some honesty with ourselves. Lent is a time where we can, as I say, take stock of our lifestyle and identify areas where we are getting dull, where we are getting addicted, where we are wasting time. And therefore, to do that, it's good to do one of those two things I mentioned, to give up something and to do something extra. We need to control our physical senses, of course, not to distort them, not to hurt them, not to repress them, but we need self-control in our physical life, our physical habits, our physical consumption, in order to bring them into a harmony. And Lent is, I think, also a time where we concentrate upon developing that harmony, that peace within ourselves, that self-acceptance that allows this sense of God to become evident. We don't bring the sense of God in to our life as if it was some new thought. It doesn't mean thinking about God all the time. The sense of God is already there. That's what we see in children, of course. It's very free, it's very spontaneous, it's very joyful and unself-conscious. But it is easily covered over by the physical senses and the life and agitation and disturbance that is easily associated with our physical senses. If you remember, that's why the Cloud of Unknowing advises the monk that he's writing for to keep it in good health so that you can meditate. It's not what the Sunday newspapers tell us. In the Sunday newspapers, we meditate in order to be healthy. But it's a good thing to remember which comes first, the horse and the cart. That our physical being, of course, is very, very sensitive. I wasn't feeling very well this morning after my trip back from Mexico yesterday, and very difficult to meditate when you're not feeling physically very well. Actually, I feel better now, probably because I meditated. But to have that distinction in one's mind and in one's reactions between the physical and the spiritual senses. Perhaps the most immediate way in which we can sharpen our sense of God is silence. The word fast in Hebrew means to cover your mouth. So it's not only to prevent you putting things into your mouth, but also to prevent things coming out of your mouth. So I think we could see fasting as very closely related to the work of silence. And to see the silence of our meditation, those periods each day when we do truly fast, not only from words and music and radio shows and stuff and emails and stuff, but where we are actually deepening that silence to bring it to that place where we can even lay aside our thoughts, which is what pure prayer meant for the early Christians. It's what meditation means. It's what the work of the mantra is, to lay aside our thoughts, not to repress them, not to try to vacuum them up, but to simply lay them aside as they inevitably arise. And as we get into that habit, a good habit, of laying aside our thoughts, this quality of silence deepens not only in the meditation, and we find that we have more quiet and more calm and less distracted meditation, but also that silence begins to enter into all of our work and relationships and everything else we're doing during the day. And with that silence comes a sharpening of our spiritual senses. In the mystical tradition, there's a very beautiful and mysterious idea, in a way, that the physical senses of touch, smell, taste, hearing, and sight are mirrored or reproduced in some way in our spiritual dimension. And I think Lent is a time for us to try to recover those spiritual senses, or that sense of our spirit, through the different ways of perception that we have. We perceive things in different ways. Physically, at the moment, we're using all our senses if we have them. Touch, we're physically present here. I don't smell anything in the room, but we may later when we have refreshments. Taste, and we will do later. Hearing and seeing. The spiritual touch is a very real experience too, when you feel a contact with someone. Or when you're truly in the moment, you feel you're making contact. It's what the doctors are trying to make their work more mindful and more present, called situational awareness. You're truly aware in the particular situation that you're in with the particular person that you're with. So there you can, yes, where we use that same expression, where we feel we were touched, even if there wasn't any physical touch. Actually, if we felt our spiritual senses more awake, we would certainly use our physical senses better and more freely. And as I said, I just came back from Mexico, where a Latin culture where people will quite naturally hug you as soon as they see you and kiss you. Very different from our more northern, frosty avoidance of physical contact. But we would have less fear of physical touch and be more natural about it if our spiritual sense of touch was awakened. Or smell. What's a spiritual smell? Well, it's probably, if you think of a smell, there was a dog in here a few minutes ago, and it doesn't look at you first, it smells you. And it can tell immediately what you are, what you're like. And are you something it can eat, or something, I don't know, probably he can smell our mood, and whether he wants to be around us or whatever. So I think the spiritual smell is that instinct we have for the true nature of something. Again, we sort of sniff out people, not physically necessarily, but we sense their true nature. And events or experiences in our lives where we have this sense of its meaning, something we smell rather than being able to name or conceptualize. And taste. When you read something, or you see a very good film, or you listen to a very enriching piece of music, you feel fed. This is food for the spirit. It's nourishing. Most of the stuff we take in, of course, today is pretty much junk food. If you think of, you turn on the radio when you drive home, or most of the stuff that's coming out is just junk food. But if our spiritual taste is awakened, we'll be more discriminating. And we will be more careful, because good and nourishing food, spiritually, tastes better than junk. Or hearing. We're bombarded by noise, by stimulation from the media constantly, physical noise in a big city. And because of that, it's very easy for our spiritual hearing to be dulled. And if, through silence, through the ascesis, through the exercises, through the training that we freely undertake, we'll find that our spiritual hearing will be improved. In other words, we'll be able to listen between the words, truly get what is being said, or truly being the real meaning or intention of what we are reading, for example, or in a conversation. Communication becomes much easier when this spiritual sensitivity is awakened and we can truly listen to what the other person is saying, not only with their words, but with their being. And finally, sight. We are bombarded with visual stimulation, visual imagery, and yet we often can't see the meaning of our life. We can't see the point of something. We can't see what it means. And again, Lent is a time to sharpen, to refocus our spiritual vision so that we can see. We can see God in the events, the movements, the relationships, the connections, even in the bad or difficult things that happen to us. We can see the inner dimension, the inner reality of things. So, Lent, I think, is a time for us to take this program of, to whatever degree is comfortable for us, of self-control, of self-discipline, of simplifying our life, of purifying the ego out of our life, putting it into its proper place, and discovering, prioritizing, discovering what is essential. And as a result of that, we will find that the whole picture begins to become clearer, full perception. Then I will know as fully as I am known, St. Paul says. May you come to the knowledge of God, even though it is beyond all knowledge. So this is the real purpose of Lent. It is to make us more spiritually alive and to bring us to a full perception where we're firing on as many engines as we can. I think this is what William Blake was talking about when he spoke about the doors of perception. He said, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is infinite. Everything would appear to us as it really is infinite. And the second part of that quotation, which is often not quoted, is also important. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through the narrow chinks of his cavern. He has closed himself up until we can see only, whatever we see only through the narrow little slots of the cavern of the basement of the ego. It's like some London basements where you have a tiny little windows. They're called garden flats sometimes. You can just sort of hardly see through them. Aldous Huxley, of course, took that passage and as the title for his book on the doors of perception, where he wrote about his use of mescaline and peyote to achieve this higher state of perception through the use of drugs. And his rationale was that the brain is a reducing valve, restricting our consciousness. So in a sense it is. We're pushing things out of our consciousness, otherwise we'd be overloaded. So Huxley thought it was reasonable to try to reverse that through the use of these psychedelic substances and achieve what he called the miracle of moment by moment naked existence, or the sort of the isness that Meister Eckhart speaks about. Well, instead of doing all of the things that I was advising, we could just take mescaline for the next 40 days. But I doubt whether it would actually lead to that full picture, to that integrated perception, to that harmony between the inner senses and the outer senses. There is something natural about this process, this program, as I was calling it. It's natural because it is built in to our human nature and to our human evolution and development. And it can't be artificially induced. Not the full picture. Obviously, some very powerful experiences might be induced, but not the integration. Where the ego has taken over the program cannot transcend the ego. And that's the whole purpose of it. That we move beyond those narrow chinks of our cavern to a inclusive, broad, total perception and resonance with everything that we see. And that we call the mind of Christ. That's why we prepare for Easter, because Easter is the point in the life of Christ where the full meaning of his life and teaching becomes apparent through his own self-transcendence, through his death and then his resurrection. And then at that point, the mind of Christ truly enters into human nature, into every human person, touches every human existence. The mind of Christ is what drives us, motivates us during Lent. And by our becoming more awake, more present, more open, through these gentle but serious little exercises or ascesis that we do, we find that we can see that the mind of Christ is beyond concepts. It's very difficult for us to imagine what it is to be beyond concepts. It's difficult for us to imagine how a child can be preconceptual, or how a saint can be post-conceptual, because most of the time we are caught up in our concepts, in our images, in our thoughts, in our representations of reality. I think later this year, Ian McGilchrist is coming here to St. Mark's to speak about his book on the brain, the two hemispheres of the brain. And his basic idea I hope he hasn't changed it by the time he comes. I don't think so, because he's been working on it for 20 years, is that the two hemispheres of the brain are both involved in all of the work, activities, thought that we are engaged in. So we need both, and both are involved in everything. At the same time, there is a world of difference between them. And the difference is in the kind of attention, the way they work, the kind of attention that they give to the world that we are part of. The left hemisphere specializes in familiar knowledge. If you've been here before, you knew to come up the stairs and where to come. If you hadn't, then your right brain specializes in new experience. So your right brain you would say, where can I go? And they say upstairs. So your right brain then is in touch with that learning moment, that present moment, and of course sends the information over to your left hemisphere for use next time you come here. So there's a world of difference between them, but they are very much in partnership. The left brain finds it very difficult to live with uncertainty. It wants answers. And the left brain doesn't like to change its mind, and certainly it doesn't like admitting that it's made a mistake. So whenever you feel yourself doing that, you can be sure that you're veering towards the left. And finally, the right brain, of course, is quite open to reality and is therefore quite able to live with uncertainty without having to control everything. The left brain works with representations of reality, maps, ideas, plans, whereas the right brain lives in the present moment. So which of these two hemispheres of the brain is the boss? Well, the one that knows what's actually happening and has the latest information is the right brain. But of course, the left brain in our culture thinks that it is the boss because it's got all this information. So, if I've summarized McGilchrist correctly, we're an excessively left-brain world. We're living in our own representations of reality. And Lent is a time to rebalance that. At least to cut back on our excessive dependence on the left brain activity. To restore to our doors of perception a capacity for direct, contemplative experience and reality. And if we can do that even a little bit, we will have a happy Lent, I hope.